Ah, friends, now I'm going to take you on a journey to the story of a daring soldier who stirred up storms not just in France, but in the heart of all Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a young officer from the small island of Corsica, making his way along a magical path that led to an empire. In the days when France was plunged into deep turmoil, after the revolution echoed through the European courts, Napoleon's name began to spread rapidly. Perhaps no one realized yet that this young man would rise high enough to become an emperor. But let me tell you, he was more than just a soldier. With his determination and intelligence, he would change the course of destiny, shake rulers to their core, and instill both hope and fear in the hearts of the people. As Napoleon achieved his first victories on the battlefields, it wasn't just armies that were flowing toward him, time itself was moving in his direction. On one side stood ideals of freedom and revolution, and on the other kings defending the old order, all ready to confront him. History was about to be rewritten with every step this young commander took. The revolution was an opportunity for him, a spark of courage and ambition. He wouldn't just transform from an ordinary soldier into a leader bearing the crown of an empire. He would be remembered with both fear and admiration across Europe. Are you ready, dear friends? Because this story will not just be about one man, it's the tale of an entire era. Now, get ready to witness Napoleon's gradual rise and how he spread from France to every corner of Europe. Time has stopped. The stage is set. Our hero is about to take the spotlight. Friends, close your eyes and imagine this: the fire of revolution has ignited in France, and the lands that have been ruled by kings for centuries have suddenly plunged into chaos. The people have risen up, shouting liberty, equality, fraternity. As the thrones of kings tremble one by one, the revolutionary flames spread like a frightening wind across Europe. A single question echoes in everyone's mind: where will this storm reach after France? Right in the midst of this turmoil, amid the ruins of the old order, a young officer previously unknown to anyone steps into the spotlight. This young man, with determination in his eyes and an iron will soon be known as the child of the revolution. This person, my friends, is none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Young yet fiercely ambitious, he shines with a sharp intelligence that sees the opportunities arising from chaos. For Napoleon, the revolution is a stage where not only France's fate is rewritten, but his own as well. Because this revolution whispers to him that he can be more than just an ordinary officer. As the revolution reshapes the map of Europe, almost like a child's play, Napoleon rises swiftly. With each victory against the enemy forces surrounding France, he becomes a hero in the eyes of both the people and the army. His victories are not just won on the battlefields, they resonate in minds and hearts. Now, in the streets of Paris, Napoleon's name echoes like a beacon of hope, seen as the man who carries the legacy of a revolution. While rulers across Europe watch in fear, the French people begin to believe that Napoleon will restore order to this chaotic environment and perhaps even give them a power far beyond the old regime. Napoleon weaves the meaning of freedom brought by the revolution, the people's hope, and strength into the fabric of his own dreams. He is no longer just a soldier, he represents the greatest legacy of the revolution, the resilience of a free nation. And now, my friends, we will witness the rise of this leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. Ah, friends, a storm of revolution is raging across French lands, and the footsteps of a new leader can be heard. Young Napoleon Bonaparte, still an unknown officer, steps into the spotlight in Toulon. The fire in his eyes, the determination he possesses, signals a great destiny waiting to emerge as he overcomes every obstacle in his path. Toulon. This port city is on the verge of falling into the hands of revolutionaries seeking to erase the last traces of the French monarchy. The British fleet and royalists have surrounded it, waiting to stab a dagger into the heart of France. But there's something no one has counted on. This young officer, Napoleon, is stepping up to save Toulon and winning a victory that changes the course of history. Think about the moments he participated in the battle, my friends. The city is engulfed in dust and smoke, the smell of gunpowder permeating everywhere. Napoleon acts like a sage as he devises the battle plan. He points out strategic positions to the soldiers, directing the artillery with lightning speed. His plan is so bold and so clever that the French troops succeed in besieging the British fleet and enemy forces. Toulon transforms into a chessboard in Napoleon's hands as he skillfully places each piece. Finally, when the enemy forces are defeated, all eyes are on this young officer. The people and the army now know his name. They begin to see Napoleon Bonaparte as a new hero. But the victory at Toulon is just the beginning, my friends. With this success at such a young age, Napoleon has found his confidence, and more importantly, he has emerged as a future leader in the eyes of France. New horizons are opening up for him, especially the Italian campaign. He sets off to spread the excitement of the French Revolution and his own bravery across Italian lands. Here, his genius military strategies and extraordinary determination on the battlefield rise to the surface once again. In Italy, while bringing the United Italian States and the Austrian Empire to their knees, Napoleon not only wins victories but also revives France's pride and strength. The people listen to his triumphs as if they were fairy tales, and the army grows even closer to him with each victory. He is no longer just a commander. He is seen as France's beacon of hope, a comrade of the revolution, and the architect of a new world. This journey from the bloody siege of Toulon to the victorious fields of Italy reveals Napoleon's genius and leadership qualities, my friends. His rise spreads the will forged by the fire of the French Revolution across Europe, while planting the first seeds of a new empire. Dear friends, after the victories that shook the geography of Europe, a new goal emerged in Napoleon's mind: to dominate the warm waters of the Mediterranean and disrupt the balance of power in this strategic region. Each victory opened up new dreams and plans for him. However, Napoleon's thoughts weren't limited to military conquests. He also desired to leave his mark on history by conquering Egypt and exploring the mysteries of the East. And so, my friends, the doors to the Egyptian campaign begin to open. Egypt was a land filled with the glory of ancient times, the cradle of civilizations. Napoleon intended to achieve military victories in this vast landscape while spreading French culture. He envisioned laying the foundations for a great empire and increasing France's influence in the Mediterranean by conquering the East. This grand plan was designed as both a military and scientific expedition. He brought along a team of scientists, historians, and artists. Egypt would be not only a battlefield but also a hub for science and culture. However, dear friends, every grand plan comes with its unique challenges. Napoleon's arrival in Egypt started with great enthusiasm. As his army advanced, shining in the hot desert winds of Egypt, The goals in Napoleon's mind were taking shape. Yet, despite this enormous campaign, unexpected events began to unfold. Egypt was turning into a battlefield, filled with enemies, natural obstacles, and social unrest. The local population's reactions to Napoleon began to overshadow the initial excitement he felt. Indeed, the lands of Egypt were filled with both historical remnants and the challenges of the continent. In the days that followed, Napoleon's army faced historic resistance at the foot of the famous pyramids. One of the biggest obstacles Napoleon faced during the Egyptian campaign was the resistance from the local population and the harsh natural conditions. Particularly, Egypt's hot climate and uprisings in rural areas began to jeopardize his plans. He had to confront enemies he had never faced in this challenging geography. The battles in Egypt became an arena where his strategies were tested, and his military strength and leadership were put to the ultimate test. One of the most notable events of the campaign was the Battle of the Nile in 1799. Here, Napoleon's foresight and military skills were called into question for the first time. The local forces in Egypt fought courageously in their resistance, attempting to wear down Napoleon's army. Every loss led to his plans being thrown into disarray, shaking his dreams. Unfortunately, the Egyptian campaign was turning out to be more than just an adventure crowned with victory. It was also a lesson in experiencing the pain of his first defeat. In the scorching deserts of Egypt, a leader navigating between victories and defeats Napoleon. On one side, the dream of an empire that would go down in history; on the other, the harsh realities filled with challenges. These experiences would strengthen him further and lay the groundwork for his future military strategies. As he sought dominance in the Mediterranean, the mysterious lands of Egypt would prove to be just the beginning for him. Ah, dear friends. Now, after Napoleon's adventures in Egypt, filled with defeats and victories, we turn our attention to the great and challenging period that began with his return to France. This time, Napoleon was preparing to capture attention not only on the battlefield but also in the political arena. In France, where the balance of power was shaken and political intrigues lurked in the shadows, a new era of governance was about to commence the Consulate. When Napoleon returned to France, his country was reeling from years of revolutionary turmoil and social unrest. The revolution had promised the people freedom and equality, but the chaos it left behind had weakened many people's hopes. The instability in governance and the endless internal strife left the populace yearning for a leader they could trust. It was during this time that Napoleon emerged as a savior in the eyes of the people. They had heard his name through his earlier victories and military successes. Now this young general claimed he could raise France from the ashes. Politics was far more complex than the battlefields. Many leaders had come and gone during the turbulent years of the French Revolution, but none had managed to establish lasting peace. Napoleon knew that this period required not only military strategy but also political acumen. France needed a new system, and he had a plan to quell the chaos. To fill the void created by the revolution, he decided to establish a new form of government called the Consulate. However, my friends, this consulate appeared to be a power-sharing arrangement on the surface. But behind the scenes, it was a cleverly devised move to consolidate Napoleon's power. With the coup of 1799, supported by the French people, Napoleon established the consulate government and declared himself the first consul. This title granted him immense authority and power. He was now the one making decisions for France and enacting laws. This new era began with a three-person governing body, but the roles of the other consuls were quite limited. The reins were firmly in Napoleon's hands. The people were starting to see this young general as not just powerful and determined in military matters, but also in politics. Napoleon reshaped the laws of the country, undertaking a profound reform of the legal system. He created new laws to ensure justice and repair the destructive effects of the revolution. These reforms, known as the Napoleonic Codes, would leave a powerful legacy that would influence not only France but also much of Europe in the years to come. The people began to believe that Napoleon could bring order and stability to France, viewing him as a savior. In this process, he was transforming into a symbol, not just a leader in his country. Dear friends, Napoleon's journey did not end here. The Consulate period was a stepping stone that would lead him to an even greater power in the future. Born from the chaos of France, this young man had established a new order and taken control of the nation's reins. Now, he was setting his sights on Europe, ready to pursue greater ambitions. But the road ahead would not only be paved with military victories, it would also be a grand journey through thrones woven with ambition and intrigue. Dear friends, we have discussed how Napoleon opened the door to great changes in France with the Consulate period. Now we shall witness how he rebuilt France not just as a leader, but as a lawmaker and a reformer. We have reached a time when Napoleon not only achieved victories in battle, but also spearheaded movements that would fundamentally alter the fabric of French society. Among these transformations, the most famous would be the celebrated legal reforms that would come to be known in history as the Code Napoleon. With the revolution, France had shaken the foundations of the old order, yet the people remained in search of stability and order. They yearned for justice to be restored, for laws to apply equally to everyone, and for chaos to come to an end. At this juncture, Napoleon took a decisive step to meet these demands. He was determined to untangle the complex knots of the law, simplifying and making it comprehensible and applicable law. The monumental body of laws that came into effect in 1804 would become a symbol of justice, not only in France but throughout Europe. The Code Napoleon protected the rights of individuals, guaranteed the sanctity of property, and delineated civil rights with clear lines. Imagine that when creating these laws, Napoleon considered all segments of society. He wanted equality before the law for everyone, from peasants to nobles and merchants to workers. He dismantled the rigid class distinctions and injustices of the old regime. The French people were now under the protection of the law. This was akin to a breath of fresh air after the chaos and uncertainty of the revolution. These new laws shaped not just the legal landscape of France, but also that of Europe. The Code Napoleon inspired the legal systems of many countries, from Italy to Germany, and from Belgium to Spain. Napoleon etched France's name in the annals of law across Europe. However, Napoleon's reforms were not limited to law alone. Education, my friends, was one of his greatest priorities. He believed knowledge and reason are the greatest strengths of a nation, and placed great emphasis on the education of French youth. He established a comprehensive education system, opening new schools and founding universities, paving the way for science and reason. By preparing the youth for the future, he nurtured them under the guidance of education. Thus, France's strength began to rest on solid foundations in both military and educational realms. He also brought significant changes to the economy. He enacted laws to invigorate trade and offered various incentives to support industry and agriculture. The French people began to evolve into a hardworking, productive society capable of building their own future. With the new banks he established, he supported the economy and opened the doors to trade. The state was now providing robust support to the people of France, both materially and spiritually. Dear friends, Napoleon's reforms had deeply permeated the spirit of France. He labored to create a society filled with justice through laws, knowledge through education, and prosperity through a strong economy. The steps he took would alter the fate of not just one generation, but many that followed, shaping France's enduring legacy across the ages. These reforms, rippling out across Europe, left a legacy that continues to inspire the formation of modern states even today. Thus, unlike his victories on the battlefields, Napoleon displayed great heroism in the internal order of France. Beyond his triumphs in the power struggles of Europe, the order and peace he established propelled France into a new era. Through these innovative movements, Napoleon transformed France into a nation that held its own destiny in its hands, leaving a lasting mark not only on his own era but for centuries to come. My dear listeners, now let us delve into how Napoleon meticulously wove his image in the eyes of the people and how he stepped onto the path that would lead him to empire, rising as both a savior and a leader from the chaos of the French Revolution. This man had become a beacon of hope and the bright light of the future for his nation. Napoleon seemed to hear the deep-seated desires of the French people, sensing their yearnings and aspirations. Thus his confidence grew as he set his sights on a grander objective, the empire. The French people watched in admiration as Napoleon achieved victories on the battlefield and restored order to the country. The triumphs he secured as a mere soldier and the heroism he displayed only deepened the love and respect the populace felt for him. People spoke of his name with pride, finding safety in tales of his bravery. Napoleon had evolved into more than just a leader. He had become a hero resonating within the soul of the nation. Yet this hero was determined to offer his people a greater gift. He understood that to elevate the French people to the pinnacle of Europe, he needed a new title. At this point, the empire became his goal. Then, the historic day arrived. On December 2nd, 1804, the doors of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris opened. But this was no ordinary ceremony. As always, Napoleon refused to accept the commonplace. Traditionally, a sovereign's crown was to be placed by the Pope, but Napoleon shattered this custom. In front of his people, he refused to bow before the Pope. Instead, he crowned himself, sending a powerful message to the French people: I write my own destiny. By placing the imperial crown upon his own head, he created a symbol that would resonate not only in France but throughout Europe. In that moment, Napoleon declared that he was not merely a soldier but the master and protector of France. The sounds of the people's breaths echoed within the towering walls of Notre Dame Cathedral, bearing witness to this moment that would alter the future of Europe. Napoleon was no longer just a general or a consul. He had become an emperor poised to shake the very foundations of the continent. The people had granted him this power, and he vowed to be worthy of their trust. Under his leadership, France was no longer just a nation, it was rising as an empire deeply rooted in the spirit of the Revolution. Dear friends, each step that Napoleon took on this path tells the tale of a provincial officer transformed into Europe's dreaded emperor. That coronation ceremony was not merely a triumph for him, but for the French people as well. For the winds of freedom birthed by the Revolution were turning into a storm under Napoleon's leadership, ready to sweep across all of Europe. This crowning moment not only changed the future of France, it signaled the dawn of a new order across Europe. Indeed, the coronation of Napoleon was not just a moment, it was the beginning of a grand epoch, dear listeners. The birth of an emperor, the rise of a nation, and the moment when the old order was shattered marked the emergence of an empire forged in the spirit of the French Revolution. My dear listeners, the young emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, was eager to demonstrate his power not only to his own people but to all of Europe. As the newly born French Empire rapidly ascended under Napoleon's leadership, the traditional powers of Europe could not remain indifferent. Established monarchies such as Austria, Russia, and England were unsettled by the rising storm of this new and powerful emperor. Thus, the Third Coalition was born, a formidable alliance aimed at halting Napoleon's ascent. The coalition forces underestimated Napoleon, perceiving his revolutionary military power as weak. Yet, they did not realize that Napoleon was more than just a commander. He was an emperor growing in stature through his military genius on the battlefield. Napoleon had equipped his army with the precision of an artist, ensuring the loyalty of his soldiers. To them, he was not merely a commander, he was a leader ignited by the flames of revolution. His troops took pride in fighting for him, wholeheartedly believing that their leader would carry them to victory. Finally, the day arrived for one of history's greatest battles, the Battle of Austerlitz. On December 2nd, 1805, the anniversary of Napoleon's coronation, this battle held special significance for the emperor. Facing the united forces of Austria and Russia, Napoleon's army was outnumbered, however. His superior strategy and the unwavering loyalty of his soldiers possessed the power to overcome any numerical disadvantage. Like a chess master, Napoleon observed his enemy's weaknesses and meticulously planned his every move. That morning, the French soldiers advanced quietly through the mist, poised to embark on one of history's most unforgettable victories. With his military genius, Napoleon achieved such a triumph at Austerlitz that the battle would come to be known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. The French army swept away the Russian and Austrian forces it encountered that early morning. On the battlefield of Austerlitz, Napoleon's intelligence and tactics astonished the world. As the sun shone upon their victory, all the other leaders in Europe understood far better how Napoleon had transformed both France and himself into a formidable power. This victory announced Napoleon's fame across the continent. He was now a leader capable of altering the fate of all Europe, not just France. The triumph at Austerlitz bestowed upon Napoleon not only a military success but also immense prestige. The great rulers of Europe now found themselves wary of him, compelled to bow before the emperor. This monumental victory solidified his imperial power across Europe and led to the dissolution of the Third Coalition. The strongest states of Europe had been defeated once again, and with this victory, Napoleon's French Empire heralded the dawn of a new era not just for France, but for all of Europe. Indeed, the Battle of Austerlitz marked such a turning point, my dear friends. It was a colossal victory that demonstrated once more how powerful Napoleon was, not only on the battlefield but also in the political arena of Europe. The continent was transforming under Napoleon's aegis, the old order was gradually crumbling, and a new age born from revolution echoed across every corner of Europe. Ah, my friends, let me tell you of the Iberian Peninsula, where one of history's bravest resistances was kindled under the harsh rays of the sun. As France, led by Napoleon, set out to conquer every corner of the land, the territories of Spain and Portugal were also on the brink of being crushed by this colossal power. Yet, in those days, something unexpected occurred. The people rose against the magnificent French army, displaying an unprecedented resilience. This was no ordinary war, it was a saga of a nation standing up against its invader with all its might. Ah, friends, this resistance would give birth to what we now call guerrilla warfare, where small but effective units wore down vast armies. When the French forces entered Spain, the traditional Spanish army struggled to mount a defense. However, Napoleon had underestimated the furious and unyielding strength of the local populace, which was deeply embedded in the spirit of the Iberian Peninsula. The brave shadows of guerrilla fighters began to roam through the narrow streets, steep slopes, and villages. Men and women, young and old. Some held weapons, while others wielded stones and sticks. The French troops were no longer facing a powerful, organized army. Instead, they confronted a popular movement that lay in ambush at every corner, instilling fear in French soldiers throughout the night. The love for freedom that permeated every stone of Spain quickly organized the people. The Iberian Peninsula was determined to pay any price, not just against the French, but for its own independence. Plans were forged in mountain villages, and attacks were launched against French soldiers in occupied cities. It was a time when French soldiers found it hard to sleep at night. At every street corner, in every shadow, there was a resistance fighter waiting to confront them. The shadow of fear never seemed to lift from the brave soldiers of Napoleon. These guerrilla battles announced the Spanish struggle for independence to the world, while in Portugal, a front of resistance emerged with the support of the English. Under the leadership of General Wellington, British troops joined forces with the Portuguese resistance fighters to create a formidable front against the French army. In the mountainous terrain of Portugal, the French were drawn into a war they were unaccustomed to. In both Spain and Portugal, the French soldiers had to contend not only with smaller but determined units, but also with the harsh nature of the land they were trying to conquer. In every valley, every forest, there awaited another trap, another act of resistance. This unexpected popular resistance and guerrilla tactics began to cast a shadow over Napoleon's invincibility. These events rekindled hopes not just in Spain and Portugal, but throughout all of Europe. The war in the Iberian Peninsula encouraged the resistors in other occupied territories and revealed that France's seemingly endless power was, in fact, fragile. Thus, the people of the Iberian Peninsula not only won their fight for freedom, but also struck one of the most significant blows against Napoleon's supremacy in Europe. Russia. What vast lands, what endless, unyielding plains. These territories have adorned the dreams of many rulers and commanders. But for a sovereign like Napoleon, this dream was much grander in his eyes. The ideal of conquering Russia's boundless realms to become the sole master of Europe burned bright. However, friends, sometimes history mercilessly teaches lessons to those who act out of ambition. And when Napoleon set out on his campaign in Russia, he had no idea what fate had in store for him. It was the year 1812. Napoleon's colossal army was truly a behemoth. Soldiers gathered from every corner of Europe marched forth as an army of nearly 500,000. What a magnificent sight it was. Soldiers stretching as far as the eye could see, shining armor, rumbling cannons, and the desire for victory beating in every soldier's heart. Yet, what awaited this army was far different from the victories Napoleon was accustomed to. For Russia was not a land that could be conquered merely by sword or numerical superiority. Its climate, geography, and the resoluteness of its people posed an adversary all their own. The initial days were thrilling for Napoleon and his troops. Greeted by the warmth of summer, the climate posed no problems at that moment. But the Russians had a different plan. Rather than confront Napoleon's massive army, they chose to retreat. They not only retreated but left nothing behind: no food, no shelter. Every village, every town turned to ruins in Napoleon's wake. This scorched earth tactic began to put the French army in a dire situation day by day. The French advanced, but in their path lay neither victory nor spoils, only burned fields and abandoned homes. Thus, as Napoleon pressed onward to Moscow, he failed to realize that the strength of his army was beginning to dwindle. When he finally reached Moscow, he was ready to deliver the final blow and declare victory. However, a different, harsh reality awaited them in Moscow. The city was empty. The populace had nearly all evacuated. And that night, something unexpected happened. The city was set ablaze. flames ignited Napoleon's dreams while leaving no refuge for the French army in Moscow. This massive army suddenly found itself in the depths of winter, with neither food nor shelter. The cold winds of autumn began to transform into the brutal storms of winter. Day by day, the freezing cold and hunger sapped the strength of the French soldiers. Not only was bread hard to find, but even the horses of the frostbitten troops began to die of starvation. At that point, Napoleon's immense army started to fragment and perish. The climate stood before him as a foe more formidable than any he had encountered in warfare. As soldiers fell one by one, there was only one thought in Napoleon's mind: to return as quickly as possible. However, on the way back, the Russian army followed them like a shadow, tracking the French soldiers' retreat. Those left behind succumbed one by one to hunger, disease, and the cold. Ah, friends, this campaign marked not just the collapse of Napoleon's army, but also the crumbling of his dreams. Ah, dear friends, after the great disaster in Russia, dark clouds had already gathered over Napoleon. However, the final blow that fate had prepared for him would not come from the east, but from the west, from the heart of his own continent, ignited by the resilient spirit of Germany. A bitter era had begun for Napoleon, one in which he would witness the extinguishing of his victories one by one, as the lands where he once dreamed of empire rose against him. The great defeat at Leipzig would become the most painful apex of this decline. It was the year 1813. Napoleon returned from the Russian campaign like a wounded lion. His grand army had crumbled, losing its former glory. The peoples across Europe sensed the emperor's vulnerability and began to muster the courage to put an end to his tyranny. In Germany, a wave of resistance rose from the populace in every city and town. A spark of rebellion against Napoleon's yoke was igniting. The peoples had begun to see through the mask of freedom that the French had brought and were rising to defend their own countries and cultures. This movement was no ordinary uprising. It was transforming into a popular rebellion that would shatter the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. The fury in the German territories, joined by Austria, Prussia, and Russia, formed a colossal coalition against Napoleon. He would not be facing a single army, but a united force broader and more formidable than he had ever encountered before. Leipzig. This city would become the stage for Napoleon's great downfall in history. Leipzig was not merely a strategic point, it was a turning point for Napoleon. This battle would ultimately become a struggle that would bring him to his knees. The bloody battle that lasted 4 days would be etched into history as the Battle of Nations. Soldiers from all corners of Europe fought side by side against Napoleon's army. Napoleon bravely commanded his troops, doing all he could on every front. However, in front of him stood not only numerical superiority but also a conviction, a passion for freedom. Friends, on this bloody battlefield in Leipzig, it was as if a chorus of nations had united against Napoleon's once magnificent, but now faded empire. On both sides, thousands of soldiers shed their blood to bring freedom to their lands, and the earth was often covered with the shadows of combatants. The thunder of cannons mixed with the war cries of soldiers. These sounds seemed to whisper that Napoleon's empire was nearing its end. And finally, dear friends, when the Battle of Leipzig came to an end, Napoleon's forces were shattered, his great army was in ruins. The legend of invincibility had been torn apart for the French. Leipzig would be remembered not just as a battle, but as the site where Napoleon's power over Europe came to an end. The peoples of Europe had taken another step toward freedom, and Napoleon's strength and authority had begun to wane. Thus, dear friends, with Leipzig, Napoleon's downfall had entered an unstoppable process. The peoples of Europe joined hands to reclaim their lands, as if Napoleon's own weapons had turned against him. From this point on, the dream that once sought to subjugate all of Europe lay in ruins, beginning to crumble under the weight of defeat. Ah, dear friends, we have now arrived at the most dramatic moments of Napoleon's story, during that final period when his grandeur was utterly shattered. After the defeat at Leipzig, the Europe that once trembled at Napoleon's presence saw the title of invincible completely vanish from his eyes. The uprisings of the peoples and the unification of nations had shattered his dream of being seen as an unassailable leader. And so, the tragic chain of events that would show even an invincible emperor could fall would stretch all the way to Paris, the heart of France. After retreating from Leipzig, Napoleon tried to regroup in France, but he found himself surrounded by enemies. The coalition forces Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the united armies of England had approached the gates of France, ready to bring the man who had once subjugated Europe to his knees. During those days, fear and anxiety prevailed in France. The people were beginning to realize that the victories Napoleon once promised were now mere illusions. Thus, dark clouds descended upon Paris, dear friends. That glorious city would become the place where the greatest blow to Napoleon's imperial dreams would be struck. To defend Paris, Napoleon mobilized all the resources at his disposal. But he was far from his former power. France's defenses were not strong enough to withstand the advancing coalition forces. Finally, in March 1814, the magnificent city of Paris slipped from Napoleon's grasp. The fall of Paris was not just a military defeat for Napoleon, it was the greatest loss of pride in his life. The man who once changed the fate of Europe was now yielding even in his own lands. The coalition forces concluded that Napoleon's continued presence on the French throne would bring only further destruction to Europe. France needed a future free from the ambitions of an emperor like Napoleon. Thus, dear friends, they compelled Napoleon to surrender and decided to exile him to the margins of history, Elba Island. Ah, this small island would become Napoleon's new home. The man who once held all of Europe in the palm of his hand was now condemned to a life of exile on a tiny piece of land. To Napoleon, Elba Island seemed both a punishment and an opportunity. On this small island, he would still retain his title, being referred to as the Emperor. However, for a man like Napoleon, who harbored great dreams, this island was no different from a cage. As the days passed, the chains that bound him grew heavier, and a worm of doubt began to gnaw at the heart of the man who saw himself as invincible. But would this exile extinguish the fire within him completely? Ah, we shall discover this together in our next tale. Dear friends, with the fall of Paris, the glorious dream of Napoleon's empire came to an end, and the man who had upended the balance of Europe was forced to bow to the will of fate. How ironic it is that a man who once commanded vast armies was now left alone on a small island, faced with memories of his former glory. But this was not the end of Napoleon's story. Ah, dear friends, the fire within Napoleon during his exile on Elba had not been extinguished. In fact, it was growing stronger with each passing day. To retreat as an emperor who had once shaken thrones across Europe was a profound shame and an unacceptable fate for him. The man who had once led magnificent armies and altered the destinies of nations was now living like a prisoner on the tiny soil of Elba. However, dear friends, Napoleon was not one to surrender throughout his days on Elba. One thought consumed his mind: to return. To return to France and once again demonstrate his power to all of Europe. Then, in the early months of 1815, in great secrecy, Napoleon decided to leave Elba. A loyal group of soldiers and followers joined him in this escape plan. The very men who once followed the emperor were now, as a twist of fate, smuggling him back to the French coast in a small boat. When the day came, Napoleon once again set foot on French soil. The people and soldiers who saw him greeted him with enthusiasm, as if they were returning to the days of old. News of Napoleon's return spread swiftly, and soon his march toward Paris became a triumphant procession. This period following his return from Elba is known in history as the 100 Days. During these 100 days, Napoleon advanced victoriously toward the capital, Paris, embraced by the people who welcomed their former emperor back with open arms. As Napoleon reclaimed the throne of France, he dreamed of regaining his former power, while the coalition forces across Europe were determined to eliminate him once and for all. The return of Napoleon set Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England into motion once again. They were resolved not to exile him a second time, but to ensure his absolute defeat. The fate of Europe was now hinging not just on Napoleon, but on whether this warrior, who threatened the peace of the entire continent, would once again take the stage. And then, dear friends, the unforgettable day arrived. Waterloo. The quiet lands of Belgium stepped onto the historical stage in this way. Napoleon intended to make one final move to reclaim his former glory. However, the Battle of Waterloo would mark the culmination of all his ambitions and dreams. On the morning of June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced Europe one last time with a great army. Yet things did not go as he had hoped. The British and Prussian forces were extremely prepared for his strategic maneuvers. Amid the thunderous roar of cannon fire, the French army began to retreat. Dear friends, Napoleon must have felt that fate was seizing him on that battlefield. The defeat at Waterloo was a true turning point for Napoleon. The man who once brought all of Europe to its knees was now forced to surrender to his fate. Napoleon was now vanquished, and his dreams were buried in the dusty pages of history. With this defeat, he faced a second and final exile. But this time it would not be to a place like Elba, but to the remote island of Saint Helena in the middle of the ocean. No longer a threat to Europe, Napoleon would spend the rest of his life in this distant, inaccessible place. Thus, the fall of an emperor, an invincible leader, came to an end. And so, dear friends, Napoleon's glorious tale came to a sorrowful close at Waterloo. Yet his legacy would remain etched in the histories of both France and all of Europe, never to be erased. Dear friends, what a weighty fate we are confronted with. Napoleon, the once powerful commander who redrew the boundaries of empires and dethroned kings, now lives a life of exile on the remote island of Saint Helena in the midst of the Atlantic. This man, who once ruled over all of Europe, was now forced to reflect on his destiny in a secluded place, far from the world stage, under the strict surveillance of the British. Imagine that the final years of an emperor would be spent on this desolate, windswept island, a land surrounded by endless seas, cradled in solitude. Saint Helena had become a prison for Napoleon. The Longwood house allocated to him was a structure battered by harsh climate conditions, constant dampness, and unrelenting winds difficult to live in. After the grandeur of imperial palaces, This place felt as cold and disheartening as a graveyard. With each passing day, Napoleon became more withdrawn, drifting further from the outside world. Only a few of his loyal friends and former officers remained with him. This small group tried to pass the time reminiscing about the days of old. As Napoleon conjured those glorious moments in his mind, he carried the pain of exile and the weight of his mistakes in a deep wound within. As the days passed, Napoleon would gaze every morning at the infinite waves of the Atlantic, scanning the horizon with his eyes. It was said that he harbored an inner hope of escape, but the truth was that each day spent on Saint Helena further eroded him, transforming his former splendor into a faint memory. Ah, friends, here Napoleon began to question himself. The decisions he had made in life, his victories, as well as his errors and the destruction he had left behind, resurfaced in his mind. He had not been born an emperor, he had ascended to the throne through sheer will, but now this throne condemned him to an endless solitude on this desolate island. Over time, Napoleon's health began to deteriorate. The humid air of the island and his confinement weakened his body day by day. He began to suffer from stomach pains and unrelenting ailments. Although the physicians by his side attempted to treat him, they understood that his illness had taken root. He was exhausting himself not only physically but also mentally. The great man who once stood up to all of Europe was now powerless even before nature. And so on May 5, 1821, the winds of Saint Helena whispered a different tale. Friends, Napoleon's magnificent life came to an end here, on this desolate island, as he cast one last glance at life. According to legend, in his final moments he murmured the names of France and his armies, for the things he cherished most in life were perhaps the very passions that had led him to this end. Napoleon's final journey did not occur in grand palaces or during magnificent victory celebrations. Yet this conclusion in Saint Helena may well have been the most fittingly poignant end to his entire grandeur. The man who had once defied Europe would now find eternal peace in his final resting place, amid the whispers of the waves. Saint Helena would remain in the annals of history as the last page of Napoleon's legend. Ah, dear friends, we have reached the end of an era, the conclusion of a legend. We bid farewell to the life of that powerful emperor who once brought Europe to its knees and swept nations along with him, now in the solitude of Saint Helena. Napoleon's rise and fall is not merely the story of a soldier or a ruler, it is a lesson intertwined with ambition, passions, grandeur, and defeat whispered to us by history. What we have witnessed tells us not only the tale of victories and power, but also of the boundaries of the human spirit. It is a journey in which an emperor, in his quest for the throne, ultimately found himself alone with only his inner voice. Napoleon, immortalized in the dusty pages of history for his courage and genius on the battlefield, perhaps achieved his greatest victory by accepting his fate. Consider this, dear friends. A person can rise to great heights, bound fervently to their dreams, without knowing their limits yet at those lofty peaks. As cold as the wind may blow, loneliness runs just as deep. This story is not just Napoleon's, but the story of all humanity. As we listen to what he experienced, we too reflect on our own ambitions, hopes, and desires for victory. History consistently shows us that both victories and defeats are inseparable parts of life, and every ascent has, sooner or later, an end. While sharing this historical journey influenced by Napoleon, we did not merely recount battlefields, victory cries, or lost territories. This journey was filled with as many defeats as victories, and as many betrayals as friendships. There were moments when the power and ambition burning within Napoleon transformed into a storm that ultimately swept him to the loneliness of Saint Helena. Now, dear friends, close your eyes and think of the final moments of Napoleon's life. On that solitary island, accompanied by the sound of Atlantic waves, beneath the stars, amidst the silence of the many who once followed him, and the blood shed for him. Perhaps he was left alone with the greatest lesson life had to teach him. At that moment, he might have realized true victory lies in making peace with oneself. Every corner of this ancient land is filled with the footprints of people who bore witness to history. And we will continue to learn from each story, drawing lessons from those traces as we live on. The experiences of Napoleon and many other great figures offer us unforgettable lessons. Remember that history does not merely recount the past, it is a compass guiding us toward the future. As we follow this compass, each of us must ask ourselves a question: what price are we willing to pay for victory? Dear friends, as we walk together through Napoleon's era, we felt once more how captivating and enlightening history can be. In future stories, let us walk together in the footsteps of other lands and heroes. Wishing you a peaceful night, remember that there are countless stories waiting to be told and lives rich with lessons in every corner of this land. Until then, history continues to call us.